Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, Maddie stepped out. Oh, sorry. Thank you to Maddie and Jack for opening up their home. Today's class is Leilu Nishmat Natan ben Leah, Refuah Shelema of Edmund ben Frida as well. And if you have any other names or things you're in, Abraham ben Latifa, Refuah Shelema. Okay. So a husband and a wife sit down to dinner, and the husband says to his wife, you know, honey, I'm always so amazed by how well, you handle the times that we get into arguments and the fights that we have. I know I could be a very difficult person to handle. This obviously never happened, but I can make people angry, and I don't know how you deal with the anger, so well. Like, what's your trick? How do you handle, getting over when something really throws you off? And she says, well, every time we get into an argument afterwards, I go and I clean the toilet. And says, really? Does that that changes everything? That makes you? He says, yeah, because I use your toothbrush. Obviously, that's a joke, but the way of dealing with anger, certainly many people deal with it in different ways. Revenge and acting out and lashing out or yelling back are certainly ways that people tend to cope with anger. But I think we'd all agree that handling our emotions in that way is not only destructive towards others, but also destructive towards ourselves. Now, rabbis speak a lot about the midah, the character trait of anger. In Hebrew, it's called ka'as. And they have very, very serious things to say about people who have short tempers, who fly off the handle, who yell, who get angry. But even people who harbor anger, right? Who are what I like to call anger stuffers. There's two types of people. There's eruptors, people who just immediately get very upset and angry and yell. And then there's other people who kind of take all their anger and pack it away, bury it in a little box somewhere, or bury it into their trunk of their car, or whatever it is, metaphorically speaking. And then at some later point, it all tends to come down upon them. It all tends to fester and boil, and they're not handling their anger that well either. Maybe on the surface, they could present themselves in a very calm and collected way, but inside, they're really very anguished, very tormented, and struggling individuals, not happy because they're stuffing their anger. Neither of those approaches is what we want to do when it comes to handling anger. Instead, we want to be able to process anger in a healthy and productive way, and to try and control and minimize it in as best a way as we can. So I guess what I want to open up a conversation about today is all anger bad? Is there some kind of maybe a potentially positive anger? Is there a way that we can potentially control or even eliminate our anger? Are there some people who just say, I'm naturally this way and it is what it is, I'll never be able to get better? Are there strategies that we can use to try to control this? These are all things that I think are worthy of speaking about, because when you hear the statements that our rabbis make about anger, it can be the most damaging and destructive emotion towards a human being getting close to Hashem. The rabbis say that a person who gets angry, it's as if they worship idols, which is a very severe and also odd statement at the same time for the rabbis to make. But it speaks to the level of damage that the rabbis believe anger can cause to a person. So I want to start by first explaining what exactly happens on a psychological level when we get angry, and maybe understanding a little bit more of the science behind it will help us to be able to begin tackling our anger and trying to come up with some strategies, both on a practical and religious level, to be able to handle it. So what's going on when we get angry? What exactly is taking place in our brain? So there is a region of our brain, which scientists believe is very old and has evolved for a very long time, called the amygdala. Anybody have heard of this before? Yes? The amygdala is a part of our brain that is triggered when we feel that we're being attacked by somebody, or that there's a threat of danger coming at us. It could be a physical threat. It could also, for most of us, be an emotional or social type threat. if we feel that somebody is attacking us, if we feel threatened, if we feel unsafe, that region of our brain starts to light up and really gets triggered. And that part of the brain initiates a what? Fight or flight response, the scientists call it. Flight, fight, or freeze, they say. One of three options. Either you attack back at the person, which is a fight response. That's what makes our heart rate go up. Our hypothalamus in our brain starts to release all kinds of hormones throughout our body. You've heard of the hormone called cortisol. Cortisol will start to raise our blood pressure, start to get us our adrenaline pumping, and all of those things will try to initiate a fight back response or a flight response in which we'll run away because we fear that there's some kind of threat, or we'll potentially, like a deer in the headlights, freeze and not do anything, right? All of these responses are possible ways that our brain will communicate to us to react when we feel like we're under pressure. At the same time, other parts of our brain are being turned off. Parts of the brain called, I know I'm boring you with a little bit of science here, but it's important. The prefrontal cortex, right, is the front part of the mind, which is in charge of logic, reason, and decision-making. That's the part of our brain that analyzes situations, looks at the pros and cons when we're trying to make a big decision, and says to ourselves, what is the best course of action? All of a sudden, that part of your brain turns off. And you can imagine, once that part of your brain turns off, your decision-making is impaired. You're not thinking reasonably and logically. And another part of your brain starts to turn off, and that's called the hippocampus, which is in charge of memory. So, by a show of hands, how many people who, when they're angry, have said something that they later come to regret, or done something that they later come to regret? How many times has that happened and you didn't even remember what it is that you said? And the answer why is because A, your decision-making part of your brain is turned off, and your memory part of your brain is turned off. So neither of those, instead of responding logically in a way that is calculated in accordance with your personality, which makes sense to you, you're responding instinctively to a threat that your mind presumes is about to attack you. Now that could be very useful if you're a hunter and you feel that there's a bull coming at you that you need to run away from or you need to shoot back at. But it's not so productive when your friend does something that gets you upset, and now you have to figure out how you're going to respond to them, or your spouse triggers you in a way that now you have to figure out how you're going to respond to that, or your children get you angry, right? Now you don't want to be acting impulsively, instinctively, based on all of those, heated emotions. You want to be able to do things in a calculated, sensical, logical, and reasonable way. And this is why anger could be so destructive, not only to the people around us, but to ourselves as well, because we're not thinking clearly. Our mind has been hijacked by all of these other things that are going on. And as a result, we do things that we will for sure regret. So once we understand all of that that's going on in the mind, the next question that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we manage this? How do we handle something that gets our mind all out of flux? And now we want to step back and try not to act in that way. What do we do? And I'll throw that question out. What are some strategies that you've developed or you come up with or you feel work when you're trying to handle a bout of anger? Right. So definitely, if we understand, as Gladys says, definitely taking some time to not act on those immediate impulses, but to allow the brain to rework itself, right? Now that you understand that all that is happening at the snap of a finger, you have to tell yourself, okay, I have to wait. If I act while I'm in that state, that mental state, bad things are going to happen. So what I need to do is I need to give myself time removed from the situation to be able to allow my brain to rewire itself, to allow those areas of the brain that I want to be involved in my decision-making to now reclaim control over myself instead of acting on those other things. So taking a break from the situation, right? If your child is infuriating you, maybe you'll say to them, this is not the right time to talk to me. Let's reconvene in a half hour. I'm going to go upstairs and you take a shower, or you listen to a piece of music, or you call your spouse and just have a separate conversation to kind of work through it, and giving your mind time to reclaim control before you then address the situation that was bothering you, that allows you to think a little bit more clearly. Certainly allowing nature to retake its course could be a very effective strategy. Problem is that can you come to that realization in the moment when your child is yelling at you, or they just broke your favorite glass vase or something else, and can you have the ability to pause at that moment is the big challenge to that strategy, at least. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
We have a parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. And when you're in fight or flight, you're in one. And when you take deep breaths, you literally shut off. I think it's your parasympathetic and turn on. I might have it reversed, but you're turning on through deep breathing, and you can't be in both states.
Right. Yeah, so absolutely. Fancy names aside. The idea is definitely, it's been proven that a lot of meditation and a lot of deep breathing can absolutely bring a sense of calm and tranquility to a person in those moments, right? And so, yes, a part of I think it goes hand in hand with what Gladys said, removing yourself from the situation and getting an opportunity to quiet the mind, right? Going through some exercises, being present in the moment and trying to reason logically, allowing that prefrontal cortex part to reclaim its control is a major part of it. And it's been proven that people who meditate or do quiet exercises, mind calming exercises on a daily basis also limit the amount of times that they become triggered. All of a sudden, the things that once angered them don't tend to anger them as much anymore, because they've learned to rewire their brain so as not to allow that portion of the brain to be triggered and ignited so easily. So it's not just in the moment. And I think this is the claim that I want, the takeaway for me most is that in the moment, it's hardest to really respond, right? Because once all of those emotions just overwhelm you, it becomes really hard at that moment to think reasonably and step back. Really, the hard work about avoiding anger or how you deal with anger is done when you're not angry, is almost what we'll call preventative medicine, right? So the same way we take care of our bodies so that we don't get into unhealthy situations, we want to take care of our anger and emotions before anger actually comes, before someone triggers us, right? So knowing what are some of the things that really get us angry is a very important part, right? Knowing what makes me tick the other way, right? What are my pet peeves, so to speak? If a person is mindful of what things, because everybody has different things that make them angry, right? For some people, noise is just really, really tough. The kids come home, a whirlwind, everyone's yelling and screaming and homework and this, and they can't stand it. Other people have a decent, are able to do that. They just can't stand when their husband leaves the underwear on the floor, right? That just is too much for them, right? So everybody has different things that sort of gets them to have those feelings, right? So knowing first and foremost what makes you feel that way prepares you for those moments, right? And now you can either try and find ways to avoid them, or you can anticipate them and already be mindful of the anger that is about to come before it actually does come. And if you're having preventative medicine, which meditation and quiet calming exercises can do, it can often rewire our brain to not get angry in the first place, to preempt those anger bouts so that they don't overtake us and overwhelm us in the moment. So I think those are a couple of really important ones. Anybody here feel like, if you're embarrassed to say it's okay, so I have a little bit of road rage sometimes? Yeah? Okay. So I tend to find, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that men typically experience road rage a little bit more than women. All of a sudden she said the summer, everybody went, oh yeah. Forgot about those 3 months. It's December. We haven't, it's been a while, but by the way, I hate seasonal road rage. I'd be that. I hate to say how many of your students raised their hands when this happened, but many of them did. Many of you knew the new 17-year-old drivers. Yeah, they said getting out of Copper Gables is really, really crazy at the end, very stressful. A lot of it, yeah, maybe it's a combination of the two things. But if you think about what road rage is, right? Road rage is a terrible type of anger that could be fatal for people if it's not properly handled and absorbed. You don't need to look far. YouTube road rage and go see all of the ridiculous accidents that happen for people because a truck, cut them off, or it's going too slow and they're trying to zip in and out of different things. People are doing some of the most insane maneuvers that gets their car, tumbled in all different directions because some guy was going 60 instead of 65 in the zone, right? And you're like, when you watch it from the outside, you're like, this is insane. Why would a person do something? But in that moment, when the person is experiencing that road rage, it's a rush that is very difficult for them to explain why they're jerking the wheel back and forth in such a crazed manner. They almost can't really figure it out for themselves, right? Why it is that they're doing that. So how do people deal with road rage? How do they figure that out? Well, one thing that
Rabbi?
Yes.
Hi, it's Rochelle Estes. How you doing?
Hi.
Hi. So I once learned that if it won't matter tomorrow, just let it go. Think about it, stop and think for a minute. And then if it really doesn't matter tomorrow, then just let it go.
Right. So
Sisters think alike. I was just about to say that.
Okay, so they cut from the same cloth. That's good. That's good news, right? So yeah, I mean, what you're trying to do when you're thinking in that way is you're trying to reframe the situation, right? Oftentimes, like you said, memory and thinking long term, those parts of our brain is kind of turned off when we're angry. We're not really thinking about the long-term consequences, which is why 2 or 3 days later, we regret what we did. And we kind of even wonder, like, why did I do that at the time? It was so silly. It so wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth ruining that relationship. It wasn't worth destroying that experience or whatever it is, right? That I had to go through that. Why wasn't I thinking about it? And the answer is because the anger turns off that level of thinking in your mind where you're not thinking about the long term. You're not thinking about how will this impact me 2 days from now or a week from now or a month from now. Right now, you're totally blinded and consumed in that moment. Most of the time, because you feel your pride has been hit or someone has treated you unfairly or unjustly. And you feel like it's up to me to stand up for myself and have to say something right now. When if you had an opportunity to reframe it and think about, is this really worth it? Is it worth my time? Is it worth my energy? Should I be handling it in this way? Or am I trying to create something a little bit better? I had a conversation with a student who felt that a test that they received from a teacher wasn't fair, right? So they were so angry and they were so upset. The second the test was over, they started just yelling at the teacher. Not fair, these questions, it wasn't on the review sheet, it wasn't this, just yelling at the teacher, right? How did the teacher respond? Okay, we're obviously not going to have this conversation now. You're not thinking clearly. Please leave and we'll figure it out another time. Or I don't know if the teacher maybe even said like, I'm not really interested in what you have to say and deal with it, right? Because certainly you can understand the teacher being bombarded by a student in that type of a way. It's going to cause them to shut down as well. So I had a conversation with the student. I said, where are you now? He says, well, I haven't talked to the teacher yet. I said, well, could you think about a different way that you would have done that differently? Well, that was the truth, and that's what it should have been. Yeah, but what did you want out of that situation? Did you just want to get your frustration out and yell at the teacher so now you feel better? Or did you really want to get a result of maybe there should be a retest, maybe there should be a curve, maybe the questions really weren't right? Do you want to get to some level of truth? Because obviously that wasn't the way that you wanted to do it, right? And she said, oh, yeah. I said, so think about how you would have done that a little bit differently if you had an opportunity to replay it. And she said, well, maybe I probably wouldn't come right after the test was over. That's a good idea. Wait a little bit and then come. Turned out she made a lot of careless mistakes and didn't read the questions properly. A lot of the questions, when she relooked at them, actually were very fair. She was just so overwhelmed by the whole thing, maybe stress, maybe panic, and that's understandable. She wasn't really thinking very clearly. And I said, did you think you were really going to get the teacher to change their mind and give you back all the points by yelling at them? Did you really think that would work? No, I didn't think that would work, but I wasn't really thinking, right? So you kind of undo the anger while it feels good in the moment to get it out, right? And to act upon it. It never feels good later on, and it undermines your ultimate goal and what you really want to see happen in the long term of things, right? So reframing things and looking at a bigger picture. Does this really matter? Is this going to be important? If I showed up, is it worth me getting angry that the person cut me off, right? Is it worth it? Is it going to change anything about my day? These are very important things for a person to try and think about. Another good way of reframing is storytelling. I'll come to Gladys, right? Storytelling. A person who gets road rage, you're on the road and someone cuts you off. Your immediate reaction is, what an idiot, why would they do that? You start yelling at them and you start getting angry. Imagine a person leaned over to you at that moment and said, they're actually on the way to the hospital, their wife's in labor. Now, do you think about the person who cut you off a little differently? Probably do, right? Now, if it's true or not, doesn't really matter, but you can reframe by storytelling. If you are able to tell yourself a story that takes away the feelings of mistreatment and unfairness that are triggering your anger, then you're able to remove that displeasing feeling and be able to cope with the anger a lot better. Because by simply reframing the story and telling it a little differently, it could immediately change all of that experience, and you could feel your anger just totally melt away. Correct. Right. So definitely apology is a whole second wave of discussion. Right. It definitely is
Rabbi.
part of it. Right. But oftentimes people don't have that. I think our hope is that a person doesn't have to do so many things, but they're constantly apologizing, because after a while, a person's not going to accept that apology. If you have a friend who's consistently doing that, after a while, stuffy sorry's in a sack, mister. I'm not really interested. You're not really doing anything to stop the root cause of what's happening over here. And additionally, sometimes the reason why they don't apologize is because they're embarrassed about the way that they acted, right? So if you can avoid that, if you maybe think about it this way, if you can take a moment to think to yourself, am I going to have to apologize for what I'm about to do 2 days from now? And if the answer to that question is yes, then the reframing has to go about to say to yourself, maybe I shouldn't be doing this right now. Someone was going to say something on Zoom.
Yes.
Yeah.
So sometimes I like to think, Hazi, maybe they're having a terrible day. I hope their day gets better, because that takes it off of me and puts it more on them for whatever they did.
Yeah, that's another good way to reframe, right? By telling yourself it's not personal, it's not about me, it's more about they must be going through something. And maybe that's even an opportunity to reach out to them if it's someone that you know and care about and say, that was very strange the way you said that. I know that's not you. I'm concerned. Is everything okay? Right? And so maybe another person lashing out is a call for help that you could be the one to respond to in that situation. And instead of taking it personally and getting angry and only adding to that person's frustration and anger and upsetness, you could actually be the one who cures them or heals them from whatever it is that's going on in that at that particular moment. So we've talked about a number of different strategies. Definitely calming the mind, stepping away from the scenario while you give yourself an opportunity to pause, and reframing through storytelling. Another thing that I think I've spoken about many times, people have heard me say, is that venting is not, in my opinion, a very healthy way of dealing with it. What I mean by venting is a person who simply just wants to express the anger with somebody else who's just going to tell them that they're right, who's just going to validate everything. Certainly validation is part of it if you feel that you've been wronged, but there has to be, there's a difference between venting and then having a therapeutic conversation with somebody. If you have a conversation with somebody who can help you to work through those emotions, who is not afraid to tell you that maybe you acted wrong in that situation and that you need to fix what it is that you did, then that's a therapeutic conversation that you can have with somebody who will bring up and help you process the emotions. Venting is usually just a person getting it out, and it only places the burden on the other person and only continues to stir up the feelings and the emotions. Now, every time you see that person, that stuff is just going to come back again, and it's not going to help the person to rid themselves of the anger. So I know a lot of people will sometimes say, oh, venting makes me feel good. And it might temporarily in the short term, but does it really in a healthy way process anger? The research seems to suggest that it doesn't, right? Therapeutic conversations with people, clear-headed, this is what happened, this is what I did I do the right thing, how could I do better? That type of a conversation with somebody can be very, very helpful, I think, yeah.
And venting subject, it is something that removing anger from himself, everyone has different techniques, but some people exercise in the physical component to releasing it. And another avenue for venting is journaling. Like when you
Correct.
You're not poisoning anybody else with your anger,
Right.
but you're releasing it in a healthier manner.
Good. So a good, healthy release of anger can sometimes be a good way of processing it. It's called expressive therapy, they call it today. It could be done, some people will put it into art. If you're an artistic person, some people will draw something or paint something or look at a piece of art, and that will provide them some therapy. Listening to music is another very good way. Exercise, writing things down. All of these are different ways in a healthy way for a person to go ahead and process what it is that they're doing, because they're being constructive. They're doing it in a way that makes them better and is not damaging anybody else in the process. This is why the Torah is so adamant about avoiding gossip or slander or evil speech, lashon hara. Oftentimes, lashon hara and slander and these types of speeches are responses to our anger. Somebody gets us angry, and as payback, we will spread a rumor about them or we'll talk bad about them to make ourselves feel better of the way they made us in that situation. And the Torah is saying that's not in any way a healthy response towards somebody that does something towards you. It only damages yourself, the person you told it to, and the person you told it about, all in the same process. You're only adding more gasoline to the fire that is being created. Certainly revenge and murder and theft, all of these things could be responses, unhealthy responses, immoral responses to a person angering somebody or attacking them and making a threat towards them. So these are all things that that are not constructive, and that's why the Torah outlaws all of them. Instead, the Torah directs us to confront things in a healthy way, to speak to the person, or to speak in a constructive way to someone who can help you, or to do some other form of an expressive therapy. I even wrote down here, reflect on our own issues and how we've done the same. Some people might call it an anger journal. These are also very, very important ways, very, very useful tools that a person can take advantage of. I wanted to share with you any other questions or comments on just that. I know I'm hitting with a lot, but all of these, for each and every one of us, a different one of these strategies could be useful. For some of us, it might be music, it might be calm. For others, it might be talking. For others, it might be reframing. So, each one of us has different reactions to our anger. Some of us are more hot-tempered, some of us less. Some of us might be multiple strategies. Some of us, one might work. And so it's useful to have this whole bag of tools at your disposal, because at different times or based on who you are, a different one might be very useful. From a Torah perspective, I want to insert one other element over here. Go back to that line that we used, that anger is equivalent to avodah zarah, to idolatry. What's the connection there? What might the rabbis be hinting to us about anger? Excellent, very good, right? Michelle says that it could be one element amongst others, is that if we are finding ourselves angry very often, or the same things are angering us consistently, it could be a window into an area that we need to strengthen. That is our emunah and our belief system in Hashem. Because if a person is able at times when things are going wrong, or a person's experiencing unpleasant experiences, if they can reframe and say to themselves, wait a minute, this is not an unpleasant experience or an unfair experience. It is a challenge that Hashem is throwing my way, because everything is orchestrated by God. Everything is brought to me by God. So this unpleasant experience is an opportunity for me, not something that is maybe a punishment, but it could be a punishment that I need to do better, or it's an opportunity for me to be able to grow as a person. And God is placing that before me so that I can overcome it, right? Reframing it in that, all of a sudden, now those feelings of I'm being mistreated or I'm being attacked, you don't feel that way. You feel like, oh, this is Hashem sending something my way for me to try to grow and to become a better individual. That's a hard way to think, but that's something that we could work on. I venture to say that people who work daily, not just at the moment of anger, but daily on different emunah aspects, people who read literature and study Chumash and focus on prayer and use that as an outlet as well, and really build their relationship with Hashem to understand that everything that happens to them is from Hashem. Ultimately, they're able to now reframe these unpleasant experiences, not as I'm being treated unfairly, but rather this is an opportunity for me to become a better person. And that could be the key as well to unloading a lot of unpleasant feelings and emotions that anger could stir up, right? And I'll give you another philosophical point, which I think is very important to understand. Because you might ask me, say, yeah, but Rabbi, my friend did something bad to me. How is that from Hashem? They chose to do something wrong, right? And I think as much as it sounds paradoxical, the two could actually be the same. In other words, somebody can be acting with free will. They could be doing something bad to you, and they could be making a decision to do something bad to you. And even though they're choosing to do it of themselves, it at the same time could be something that Hashem is throwing at you. And an example that comes to mind for me is David HaMelech. There's a story in Shemuel Bet where David is running away from his son Avshalom, who's trying to kill him. His son Avshalom is trying to overthrow David, and David is running away from him. And as he's leaving Israel, a man by the name of Shim'i ben Gera starts to hurl stones and insults at him. He starts to curse David publicly in front of thousands of people, right? And you're David, you're the king. The king is supposed to be respected. At that moment, you'd well be within your right to say to one of your men, go kill him. He's disrespecting the king. In fact, one of David's men does come over to him and say, David, shall I go kill him? He's disrespecting the king. And at that moment, David steps back and he says, no, he's being sent by Hashem. This is a consequence of my actions. Now is not the time for me to take revenge against him. He'll get his punishment later on. The time will come. And we see later on, Shim'i ben Gera does get his eventual punishment. But at that moment, David says, this is not about him, this is about me. I have to worry about bigger things going on in my life with my son Avshalom. I'm not going to waste valuable time and energy and emotion on dealing with what Shim'i ben Gera is doing. And he chooses to ignore him. And I think that's a very powerful story if we put ourselves in David HaMelech's shoes in many different things that happen to us. Somebody does something to us that really, really upsets us, or someone does something to our child that really upsets us, right? And our instinct at that point is to step into action, right? And to take all those negative emotions and to try to do something about it. And sometimes we have to take the David HaMelech approach. Sometimes we have to step back and say to ourselves, as Michelle said, wait a minute, maybe this is something that Hashem is sending my way for me to handle in a different way, even though that person is doing the wrong thing. And they'll have to account for that on their own. And maybe we have to repair that relationship separately. Right now, this is for me to figure out for myself. I have to control myself. I have to control my family. And I have to make sure to handle this in a much more calm, cool, and collected type of way. That type of thinking could also be very advantageous towards getting rid of this negative emotion that we like to call anger. Other questions or thoughts about that? So before yes, go ahead.
I just feel like there's always a lesson there is what is this supposed to mean to me? If something happens and somebody does something to me, it's about my reaction and what Hashem wants me to take from that situation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And inserting Hashem into the conversation and thinking about it from that perspective, I think can make all of the difference in reframing our way of thinking. So certainly anger can do a lot to our mind. It can change the way we think, it can change the way we act. But taking a break, taking a pause, meditating, quieting ourselves, thinking about Hashem, maybe doing some kind of expressive therapy, getting involved in a hobby that can take our mind off of it. All of these are ways of avoiding doing something in the heat of the moment that we may come to have to apologize for later or regret later. And thinking about how destructive anger could be. Anger can ruin families. It can ruin relationships. It could ruin yourself. It could ruin the happiness that you want to have on a day-to-day basis. If you're thinking about all of that and you're mindful of it, I think all of those will help a person to be able to avoid that type of anger that could be so damaging to us. Many statements are made in the Mishnah in Pirke Avot about anger. I'll share two of them with you. One is in chapter 2:10. It says that Rabbi Eliezer said, "Al tihi noach lichos." Do not be quick to get angry. So I have an interesting thought question for you. Is it better to be somebody who gets angry quickly but calms down quickly, or be someone who doesn't get angry as quick but is very hard to calm down once they get angry? Which of those would you rather be? Is it better to be more patient but harder to calm down, or better to be, what did I just say? No, right? Quick to anger, quick to forgive, or harder to anger but harder to forgive? Which of those is a better quality of trait? Why do you say that? Why do you say the first one, Kim? Mm-hmm. So Kim says that it's a normal emotion. It's part of how God wired us in there. So it's not something that we could really eliminate totally. But if you know how to calm yourself down very, very quickly, you can neutralize that anger without a problem. Okay. So that's even before that, right? Recognize the signs so you can even maybe avoid the anger in the first place or easily control it. Okay.
Place to be in, whereas if you're very slow to anger, you have a harder time being calmed down. Obviously, number one, it's more helpful for it to be less open, but it's obviously something that really bothered you, that really means a lot to you. So I feel like it's better to get angry once in a blue about something important than it is to be constantly getting angry, even if you let it go long. You didn't say constantly, you just said quick
to anger sounds a lot like it happens often, right? I mean, if a person is quick to anger, it means that even the smallest things would make them, would throw them off like a little bit to a degree. I hear where, right. Yeah. You were thinking.
Okay.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I guess it depends I guess it kind of depends a little bit on how we're defining it or how we're looking at it. Right. It's interesting that the Mishnah in Pirke Avot says like this. It says there are 4 kinds of temperaments: easy to become angry and easy to be appeased. His gain disappears in his loss. So the good thing that you're able to be calmed down disappears because you get angry very easily. Hard to become angry and hard to appease, his loss disappears in his gain. So it sounds like the rabbis are a little bit more on the side of better to not be able to be angered so quickly, even though it's hard for you to calm down in that situation. Hard to become angry and easy to be appeased is a very pious person. Notice how the rabbis are not saying that's the way you should be. It's almost like that's a really high level, right? To be somebody who's slow to anger and quickly is forgiven is a really high level. That's not a simple level to achieve. Easy to become angry and hard to be appeased is a wicked person, right? So the rabbis here are trying to work through all of these different thoughts, but they're basically saying that where we want to try to go is we want to try to use these tactics preemptively so that we don't get angered very, very often, or which I think everybody agrees with, or as easily. It takes a lot more to get us to have that emotional distress of anger. Things don't bother us as much, right? That's where the rabbis want us to go. That's the better of the two qualities. And I think that doing these tactics before we get angry, working on our minds, working on our emunah, contextualizing these things in our life are what will allow us to not be able to become angry as quickly. What you're also seeing is that it's not an excuse for a person to say, well, Hashem made me this way, right? Hashem makes all of us with different qualities, positive and negative. Nobody is ever allowed to just say, well, I have this negative quality. That's how Hashem created me. So Hashem's going to have to deal with it. It's just the way it is, right? When Hashem creates us with negative qualities, positive and negative qualities, we're meant to harness those negative emotions. So if a person is a hot-tempered individual, everybody has different temperaments. But if a person's temperament is to be aggressive, is to be a little bit more short-fused, that's something they have to work on. They cannot simply say, well, that's just who I am. They have to be able to say to themselves, I need to build strategies to be able to refine and change that personality. Because the rabbis are telling us you can change who you are. You can shift your personality. You can rewire your thinking. And that's the challenge that each and every one of us have. Whatever our negative quality is, we have to work on those qualities. We cannot simply say, this is just who we are and we're going to have to deal with it. No, we have to work to be able to refine it and change it. And anger is certainly one of those. It was given to us for a reason, right? I'll throw out the question, is there a good anger? Is there a good anger? Yeah. Is there?
Because if that I was reading here, there is a place for anger.
Okay.
You want to go where, you talk about didn't get involved. Why didn't they get angry? Why didn't they,
Right, you're saying like there's an opportunity for, let's say, outrage at something that's not just. When there's clearly something immoral or unjust happening, there's an opportunity for outrage to speak up, right? Right.
Yeah, and you're just
Are you saying is right? That's what I was about to ask you, right? In other words, when we say something bothers me, so I speak out about it, right? You could say I'm angry about it, but it's not the same type of anger. In other words, there's the anger of I was personally slighted, right? Somebody attacked me and I'm worried about my honor, like you said, my indignation. Or there's, I feel something is wrong or something, happened that was wrong and I feel a need to step up for it, right? Okay, correct.
There's something not right.
then
Right.
you change them. You
Yeah.
change about yourself.
Right.
Like, it's something-
True. Yes, 100%. I think if anger is properly processed, and again, what are you angry at? If it's I'm upset at the way I handled the situation, or I'm angry that the injustice was occurred, those are one things. I think once ego gets involved in it, and it's not a coincidence that rabbis talk about anger and ego almost as two sides of the same coin, right? Because often what is igniting our anger? It is the feeling that our ego or our pride was hit, was damaged by somebody. That's often the thing that is igniting. And if you probably fix one, you could fix the other. Maybe even fixing one's ego could be the pre-cure to handling their anger, because if you're not arrogant, if you're not egotistical, then less things will bother you because you won't perceive others as attacking your honor, which is the reason why we tend to feel anger when we feel that someone has slighted or hurt our pride, right? So certainly those two things go hand in hand. How do you think about that? Yeah.
Always something about yourself,
Mhm.
pride is something I take pride in my children and in my family, but an ego is something you take on yourself.
Okay.
I don't feel egotistical about my family. I feel pride about my family.
Right.
There's
Yeah, I could see that. I could
difference
see using it in that context for sure. But I think also there could be a sense of pride about yourself, right? Sometimes when people are very stubborn, we say, oh, they're very prideful people. People have a hard time apologizing for something. We'll often say, oh, they have a lot of pride. So yeah, I guess I'm seeing them synonymously, but in the context that you used it, it's very different, right? Taking pride in the achievements of your family members or feeling good about something that you did, if it's not done in a narcissistic way, I could definitely see that being a positive. So pride, depending on how it's used in context, can for sure go one way or the other. But in some context, it could be looked at as a similar type of right. Right, that's the way you use it. Yeah, sometimes could be used in a negative, but okay, it's semantics. I think it depends on how it's being expressed. Understand that even the best among us succumb to the sin of anger. That Rambam writes that Moshe was not granted access into Eretz Israel because he got angry at the Jewish people, and that's what caused him to hit the rock. So even the greatest human beings to ever walk the face of the earth have struggled with the concept of anger on their level, which is very fine. Certainly on our level, it's a much bigger issue. So we shouldn't, look down at ourselves for the fact that we have to deal with that. It's something that every human being goes through. Like Kim said, it's a natural emotion. And there's a time and a place to stand up for yourself if you're feeling like we're not asking people to be doormats and take everything that someone said when boundaries are being crossed. But the question is, are you doing it for your ego, or are you doing it because there's an injustice or something wrong where you feel like you have to train somebody else to do things the right way? So I think we hit on a lot of different possibilities, a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different strategies. I'll leave you with one last image that could help us with anger. And that's, think about the type of anger that you display towards your children, right? I think for the most part, I look around the room and I see very loving, very caring, very great parents, right, who are building up a tremendous community. So I think I could say with strength that many of us, when we get angry at our children, what do we really mean when we get angry at them, right? I don't think it's the same type of anger we have towards the guy who cut us off on the road, right? It's almost an anger of concern, right? If my child reaches for the stove while the fire's on and I get angry at him and I smack his hand, it's a loving type of anger. It's an anger that I want them to do better. It's an anger of concern for their well-being, right? So imagine we took that model and applied it everywhere else in our life, where anytime we felt that type of anger, it would only be acceptable if it was an anger that was brought out of love, out of concern for myself, my child, or the other person. Maybe that would be a model of when anger would be acceptable. Yeah. Correct. Yes. And then Rambam says, it's different between showing anger and feeling anger, right? You're showing anger so that the other person recognizes that what they did was wrong, but you're not feeling that hit to your pride or your ego, right, at that moment. And that's what's taking that away. Anyway, I think we could continue this conversation for quite some time. I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to talk about it, but hopefully it's meaningful just to get the brain flowing and thinking a little bit about our midot and our characteristics and how we can improve them for ourselves and for our children as well. Have a great day.